Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, I'm going to be delving into Linux FireJails and giving you some information kind of from an introduction standpoint, but we'll talk about some of the advanced features of it as well right after this. So I've been talking a little bit about security the last couple of weeks and hardening the system, and some questions have come up about containers and jails and when to use, all these different tools. So I've got a video on AppArmor and SE Linux already, so I thought I would delve into the one piece I don't have, which is FireJail. So let's take a look at that and find out what that's all about. So what is it? What is FireJail? It is a set owner user ID, or SUID, program that restricts untrusted applications. Now, that doesn't mean applications necessarily from untrusted sources, but it really means that you have applications that can do bad things, like a browser which has JavaScript enabled, which could be used to install malicious code into your system. But it basically gives a process or application its own private view of the globally shared kernel and the resources that are used. There are really three different areas that we're going to deal with inside of FireJail, and that's the network, process table, and the mount table. So it's written in C, and there are no dependencies, so it's not a big application. It's a very small footprint, but it does require Linux kernel 3.8. Well, actually 3.x, but the full support is in 3.8 or higher in order to be able to use it. So, but it doesn't require any configuration to use it, and I'll talk about why that is. Okay, great, but what is it? It's a sandbox. It's used to sandbox any kind of process and its descendants. So if you start a process, then everything under it will also be protected by the FireJail or the sandbox. It can protect server processes, GUI processes, and even the Linux login. So protection at that level, of course, would then cascade to all your applications. That could have bad consequences if you're restricting access to the file system. If you're a developer or whatever, you may not have access to libraries that you need. So you may have to do some adjustment when the profiles to make it, if you do that login process. I wouldn't really advise doing that, at least until you're familiar with how it works and what it does. But it includes security profiles for many Linux applications: Firefox, Chromium, VLC, GIMP, Transmission. At the time that I'm doing this, it installed 908 profiles in Etsy FireJail. So quite a few are supported. So when to use it? Well, you can use it anytime because the security features are already built into the Linux kernel. There's no daemon that has to run. You can use it whenever you want. In fact, you can turn it on all of your desktop applications if you want as well. I'll show you how to do that when we get into taking a look at it. But the FireJail team also has an open policy about the full disclosure for vulnerabilities, similar to Debian. So yeah, they on their download site, they actually publish the CVEs and the versions that were impacted by it. So you can get a full disclosure on any of the vulnerabilities that are found in the system. It has a zero impact to system performance once it gets going. There is a slight stall that you'll see as it sets up the sandbox initially, but after that, it's pretty much out of your way. It is a GPL version 2 license, so you are free to use this. But Linux namespaces, what the heck are those? So 3.8 defined 6 Linux namespaces. Now, of course, you know about the two common ones, right? The system and the user. We've always talked about these. But there is a further subdivision that also occurs, and this affects sandboxes. So you have the mount namespace, and that isolates any of the file system mount points that are seen by a group of processes, meaning that my sandbox can share the same mount points as my total system. except they might point to different places. So I can override, where I want. Maybe I have a default temp. Maybe I want to override that and create one specific to my namespace. For example, I don't know if you'd want to do that, but I'm just giving you an example. Use TS namespaces isolates the system identities. That would be your host name or your node name and domain name used. Each container can certainly have its own. You don't have to use the one that's inherited from the host. IPC namespaces. Now, this is a common way that attackers gain access to the system is through IPC resources, and generally that's done through networking, but they can gain access to and do privileged escalation, and that is a known vector to be able to accomplish that. So again, it's isolating the IPC processes, so they get in, so what? They're into the sandbox, they can't touch your system. The PID namespaces isolates the processes in different PID namespaces. So you could have PIDs, processes that are running with identical process ID numbers, which isn't possible in Linux normally. So yeah, you can bring up your own set of applications. You can, that kind of thing. That mimic the same behavior that's on the system. Network namespaces, this is isolating your network resources. This would be your sockets, this would be your routing, this would be the IP address. All of those things would be in there. The user spaces, that isolates the user and group process IDs. Again, they can be duplicates for what you have in the system, but they can be given different privileges. So say one example might be that you give a user system privileges or root privileges in the non-protected sandbox, but in the protected sandbox you revoke it. Just an example. Or you might put more restrictive access on the file systems as what they can read, and maybe you make them a member of a different group. But anyway, file containers. These are so the application container is really on the outside, and the application container automatically creates the file system container when you bring up an application under FireJails. FireJails destroys that application container once the application exits. So it automatically blows it up, throws everything away, destroys the file container with it. So if there had been any malicious activity, any changes to your file system, any installation of code, bye, it's gone as soon as you exit the program. So the container is based on the file system currently installed. So what I mean by that is that certain file systems, certain file system types, you can modify. You can default it to the current ones that you have, or you can modify it when you bring the application up. So the nice thing about containers like this and the sandbox containers is that there isn't anything special you have to do to keep them updated. If you keep your core system updated, they get updated right along with it. It's not like a virtual machine. It's not like Docker where you have an internal operating system inside of those things where you have to, if you want updates to those, you have to perform them. Same with VMs. VMs, you have to, those have to be maintained as well as anything else. So zero maintenance as far as having to worry about updates beyond what your normal system updates would be. Same with backup. That all gets backed up with it because your sandboxes are destroyed. But your configurations are backed up as part of your Etsy, if you are backing up your Etsy tables. Security filters. It is based on seccomp-bpf. I did a video a while back on Berkeley packet filters, and this sandboxing technology is implemented in FireJails. So that is how it does its sandboxing and how it gains access to it. There is a thing called the protocol, which is based on seccomp-bpf as well, and those are filters for your network sockets. There's also a no root user namespace that allows only one valid user into that sandbox. Someone coming in and attempting to add a user to your machine or to execute as root won't be able to do it because that is blocked. The Linux capabilities, it is POSIX 1003.1, and those are a list of restrictions on what root can do. So normally in the Linux space, a root is capable of doing everything, but under a FireJail, they can't. There are restrictions that you can put in place in the profile that limit the abilities of the root user. In fact, they come default, they disable them, so you have to open them up. X11 sandboxing support around the X11 server, Xpra, and Zephyr. I noticed that there are profiles also for applications which are configured for Wayland, such as the changes that went in recently for Firefox to support it. There is direct support for GR Security and also for AppArmor. Don't know if there's anything specific that's been developed for SE Linux yet. Don't think so. I didn't see anything on the website about it. Networking support, you can attach a brand new TCP/IP environment. So you can think of that as a virtual machine, the way they do it as well. So they can have their own IP address, they can have their own IP stack, they can have their own IP router, you can implement those inside of the Linux namespace that's separate, totally separate from your true Linux configuration. And of course, then you could either restrict the network access or you could block the network access to certain ports. So if your machines, for example, had 3 network cards in it, you could restrict it to 1 network card if you wanted to do that. So you can also, this means you can block all access to the listening sockets as well. And that is the way sandbox escape exploits work. So if you've read about, is this going to be susceptible to a sandbox escape? No, because you can block access to the listening sockets, and then there's nothing for them to grab a hold of to gain access into the system to get to the IPC, which is where they would go to jump off into a shell. Security profiles, Etsy FireJail. They describe the file system container. They describe the security filters, and they also subscribe the network configuration. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I think we're about ready to go jump off into that. So let me go. Let me just jump over to the full screen here, and we'll get rid of this, and I'll bring up this here, and let's see. Probably should make that just a little bigger, and then I'll slide that off so part of it's not blocking. So first thing probably you want to know is for Fedora, it's install FireJail, and for Ubuntu it would be, now there is also a FireTools that's under Ubuntu, which has a Qt GUI, so that you can launch your applications from there if you want. There is not a GUI for Fedora, not one that I know of yet, at least available. So, but of course I could compile it from source and get it that way. So just be aware it is a Qt app, and if you're running a non-Qt desktop, just be aware it may install more things than you intended. One other thing. The commands that are installed out here are FireJail, and we can do a help, and it'll give you some examples here. Also, there is fireconfig. Fireconfig is kind of interesting. If you want all of your desktop applications that this knows about, all 908 of them, to be run automatically under a FireJail, you can run fireconfig under sudo, and it will automatically create a link to fire up a FireJail for every one of those. But just be aware that you may have unintended side effects that maybe you'll have to go in and tweak some of the profiles. For example, one thing I can think of would be if you're publishing to YouTube. Just make sure the directories are whitelisted where you store your videos to upload, and along with your thumbnails. Otherwise, you might have a little problem doing that. So anyway, just telling you that if you do this, it turns it on, and it will tell you as it goes through which ones it's created the linkages for. So yeah, you don't have to, or you can just leave it, don't do that, and just do. Now I already have mine configured with fireconfig, so but you could do. So it's going to come up and it's going to say I already found one because it's already enabled. But let's bring it up. You'll notice that there's a kind of a brief delay as it creates the app container under it. And yeah, so, but how do we know we're actually running under a FireJail? Let me do a new window here. That's how you know. It tells me that I have one that's running for Chrome. It has one that's created for OBS, and then there's one for FireJail, and that is for LibreOffice, and then one for Firefox. So, yeah, I did not have to do the FireJail command, but I'm showing you how to do it. Mine is configured to always run under FireJail. So, yeah, I live dangerously. But anyway, yeah, that's running under that. Since we're in here, let's go to the FireJail website. So yeah, first thing I want to show you is the CVE status. So yeah, all open. They haven't had one in a while. That's back from 2019 against their, and they fixed it in 9.6. Also in 9.5.6 long-term release. So yeah, they have a number of engineering builds as well, and then they have a long-term support release as well. So those have been patched. This has been patched. And then, yeah, and it tells you all these have been fixed as well. So they're fully open. They don't hide anything. So that's good. I mean, a security application shouldn't hide anything. Well, we want to know. Now, I've tried this app image support. Your results may vary. This is something fairly new that they've added to FireJail, where it will support app images. But I like the Balena application that we use to burn the SD cards with. Doesn't work. So at least the app image that I have, I probably need to go update it. It's probably old, and I probably need to go update it. But yeah, it will support, and they have tested like Krita and some of those that do work. So if you do want to protect your FireJail, your app images with FireJail, you can certainly do that. I guess probably the other thing we can do, let's go ahead and shut this down. And we'll go into Etsy FireJail. Let's look at the one for Firefox. I think it's called Common. And we can look through here. So you'll notice that you can include some, global definitions. It's kind of like a shell script, sort of, kind of. And then there's the breaks DRM binary is good. And then there's a no blacklist for this directory. Yeah, PKI, that's where it gets its security from. And then there's some include files here. There is a whitelist on your downloads. So if you are, this would be where you would whitelist like your directories that you would were storing videos. If you wanted to have access by the YouTube app, you would need to include those in here. And then there's some information here for AppArmor. There's your net filters. There's the no root, disable mounts, private devices, and then there's some that are commented out down here. This looks like it fixes some problems on CentOS. So yeah, there's full documentation on their website. So if you're interested in what each of these commands do, I'm not going to cover that today. It's a lot larger than I want to do. But yeah. So if you want to do a full support on all the application base that's in there, you just do a sudo fireconfig by itself. That's it. So, not a very long lesson today. It's a really simple application. It's also very good. Yeah, you're going to be doing some tweaking with it to get it to work the way you want it to. in order to open up the files that you need access to, particularly if the profile is restricted, is very restricted. Now, in most cases, it's not, but in some it may be. So you may have to spend some time, like with browsers and so forth, to open up the areas of the system where you really need access for those. Hope you enjoyed this today. If you did, please like and subscribe. And as always, hope to see you in the next video, and bye for now.